So today I want to look at Africa's cultural diversity or Africa's ethnic diversity. And when you look at Africa, it has a lot of cultural diversity, which implies there's a lot of languages, there's a lot of different cultures. Well, according to the studies, you find that there's at least, those that have been recorded, there's about 2,000 languages that are spoken in Africa. And those 2,000 languages simply denotes that there is, of course, 2,000 cultures that exist in Africa. They say this ethnic or cultural diversity is attributed to the long history that Africa has, and of course various geographic regions, and the numerous languages and cultures, of course, that exist. So today I just want to look at the reasons precisely why Africa has got such huge or large number of languages spoken, which simply means a lot of cultures that are existing. Now, when you look at some of the regions in Africa, or other countries that have got a lot of diversity, number one, you look at Nigeria. According to studies, or rather what is prevailing or on record, Nigeria has a total number of languages of about 520 spoken in Nigeria. That is, of course, followed by Cameroon with about 277. Then we have the Democratic Republic of Congo with about 214 thereabout. In my country, Zambia, I think we have about 78 languages that are spoken. So you find that Africa has a lot of languages, which simply means there's a lot of diversity in languages and cultures that are existing. Now, if we were to compare that to other regions around the world, when it comes to Asia and Europe, I think they have countries that are much less of ethnic diversity as compared to Africa. When you look at the larger regions or large countries in Europe and Asia, let me talk of Russia. Russia, you find that that is a homogeneous ethnic country that exists there, because I think there is less of many ethnic group or cultures that exist there, followed by China. I think that's why you find that these people speak one common thing. There isn't much of conflicts, whatever the government says and so on, because there is only one ethnic group, or rather less ethnic groups that are existing in these regions. Europe also has many countries that has less ethnic groups, but when we look at other regions such as the Americas, whether North or South America, those have got a bit of diverse cultures. Well, this could be attributed to the fact that a lot of people that are in these regions are not the indigenous people of that particular region, and you find that a lot of people have migrated and others were shipped as slaves when we talk of blacks. So there is a bit of diversity in culture or ethnic groups that exist in the Americas. Well, in Australia, I think there is a bit of homogeneousness in terms of ethnic group that is in there. Or this could be attributed to the fact that probably we had one particular ethnic group from Europe that went to occupy Australia, and that was just one ethnic group. So when you look at Australia, mostly we are calling it a very homogeneous region, because there's only one or less ethnic group, that is the indigenous people of Australia. All of them, I think, have been chucked out, or there's just a small number that is living in the outskirts of Australia. So that is about the comparison when it comes to the diversity of Africa as compared to the other regions. Now, when we look at now this divisiveness of Africa, you find that it has brought a lot of instability in the region. You find that as a result of this diverse cultural that Africa has, or diverse culture that Africa has, you find that it has now low economic growth, there's political instability, and there's a lot of conflicts. There's also high inequality, because whatever government comes in power tends to favor its own ethnic groups and so on. So the other ethnic group kind of suffers. Then there is no provision of public goods. So this ethnicity, the diverse in ethnicity or culture, has really impacted Africa. But then the main thing I want to look at is what has brought about these, or the diversiveness of Africa in terms of culture or ethnic groups that are there. Well, I want to group them in 3 categories. So there are 3 reasons, and we are calling them: 1, there's a pre-colonial reasons or origins. So there's also now the colonial reasons or the colonial origins. Then there's also the post-colonial origins. Now, when we look at the pre-colonial, you find that Africa, well, we can look at the geographic diversity of Africa. Africa has been known as a region where things like famines thrive because of good rainfall, warm temperatures that are good for farming. But then, of course, not all regions are like that, but most parts of the continent is like that. So you find that if a particular region is suffering from, let's talk of low rainfall, you find that ethnic group that is in that particular region will begin to migrate to another particular region where they can obtain good rainfall and good temperatures for farming. So now wherever they'll go and settle, they'll go and probably find another tribe in that region. They'll settle together or begin trading together. And as time goes by, let's talk of 100 years, they are occupying together that region, or more years, you find that they would have formed a particular language, they would have formed some changes in their cultural activities. So now in that, they have formed a new culture. So that is one way we can look at it. Then the other way, of course, pre-colonial, has to do with slave trade. When there was slave trade, the Atlantic slave trade, there's also the Indian slave trade, and then there's also the Middle East slave trade. So all these slave trades that were occurring in Africa, and remember, the slave trade lasted, I think, about 400 years. So that's quite a very long time. But then when you look at these slave trades, they were not just getting people, taking them to, for example, if we look at the Atlantic slave trade, taking Africans to the Americas and Europe and so on. There was also slave trade within Africa where people would get some Africans in the south and transport them to the north to work there. So there was also this trade that was also happening within Africa. So when they get some particular a group of people from that ethnic group and transport them to the north of Africa, that means they have divided that particular group, and wherever it's going to form its own, culture, and it will have its own ethnic group, because whatever it had from the previous group will soon or later on be diluted, and they'll form their own languages and so on. I think just to take you back on the geographic diversity, you'll find we have got the Bantu speaking people. When you look at the Bantu speaking people, these are the people that occupied the regions of Cameroon and the regions of Nigeria in the times of before Christ. So, but we have migrated everywhere, and we are calling them the Bantu people because of the commonalities in the languages. So we can say these people existed as one ethnic group at one particular time, but due to the geographic divisiveness, search for good rainfall, search for good economic, or rather trade, they migrated to everywhere. So you find that the Bantu speaking people now are everywhere in Africa. You find them in east part of Africa, in the central, the west, the southern part. So they are everywhere as a result, and they formed their own culture. So you find them in Tanzania. They are not the same, but then when they are speaking, you find there's a bit of commonalities in their languages. So that's what we mean when we look at cultural or geographic diversity. And then I've talked of the slave trade. Then there is the colonial origins. One thing we have to look at is that when the colonial powers came to Africa, they came with one tactic, which we are calling the divide and rule tactic. So when they brought this to conquer the people in the region with a divide and rule tactic, this will be where they'll find an ethnic group, and in that ethnic group, we all have differences. Like there's always differences in a group of people. So the colonial powers will capitalize on those differences that are occurring in that particular ethnic group, and begin, to speak ill of the others. So they'll be, enticing some sort of conflict in a particular group of that ethnic group, and they'll speak probably ill of, just trying to create some sort of division in that ethnic group. So when that now occurs, you find that the ethnic group will be divided, others will decide to migrate to another region, and so on. So now wherever they'll go, they'll probably form another ethnic group. They call themselves a different name, and probably obtain other cultural activities. And as they live on in that particular region that they've occupied, let's say if they live there 100 years and more, they would have formed their own culture, and that means even their language would have changed, and so on. Then the other, with the same divide and rule tactic the colonial powers came with, the divide and rule tactic, there is also what we are calling religious differences. Remember, Africa is never had a particular religion, so it practiced what we are calling spirituality. So now, when the colonial powers came, in this case, they brought, for example, Christianity, and you are practicing spirituality, then they bring you Christianity. Then not everybody will be on the same boat and say, yeah, Christianity, let's dive in. Others will be like, no, we've got our own, tradition, and this is spirituality, this is how we do it. So now that will bring a lot of divisions among them. So those who are pro-African spirituality will leave that particular region, or those that are pro-Christianity will leave that particular region and go elsewhere and form their own, ethnic group. And that means they would, as they lived on in that particular region, they would have formed, new cultures, new languages. So that is what the divide and rule tactic also brought in. Then it also brought in what we are calling social stratification, which simply means, we've got some elite people everywhere. There are elite people. Even in tribes, there were elite people. So the colonial powers will, capitalize on the elite people, that particular ethnic group, and they'll begin to give them gifts, favoring them, and so on and so forth. So now that also brought some sort of division, breaking up of that ethnic group and migrating to other region, as I've mentioned, forming a new culture, and of course ultimately a new language. Then, apart from the divide and rule tactic, there is now the division of Africa itself at the Berlin Conference. So I think when too many activities of the Europeans continued coming, and being hungry for land in Africa, you find that now the European powers didn't want some sort of conflicts among themselves, so they called in for a conference, which we're calling the Berlin Conference, and they sat at that table and divided Africa as they saw fit. And in that division, you find that they never considered the fact that there were different ethnic groups that existed in those regions. So let's take, for example, the British came and occupied, Zambia, occupied Malawi, occupied Zimbabwe. But when you look at this particular region, there were a lot of ethnic groups, and that existed. So when they divided, so this is the region for the British, they never considered that when we cut, this particular region into Zambia, Nyasaland, or into Northern Rhodesia, Nyasaland, and Southern Rhodesia, they never considered the fact that there are ethnic groups that are there. They just divided. So whoever was in Northern Rhodesia, meaning they've lost contact with the Southern Rhodesia, and it means they have divided that particular ethnic group where there's that division line, So now, and they brought in their own policies, their own. So if you're from Northern Rhodesia, you have nothing to do with Nyasaland, or you have nothing to do with the Southern Rhodesia, because now these are different regions. But remember, it's just division by land, and it means they've also divided the ethnic groups that were there, and it brought kind of inability for people to come together, because they are still an ethnic group, but with that division, it was now kind of not possible for the ethnic groups to come in and continue with the same cultural activities that they had. So that is the colonial reasons that also increased in the divisiveness, or rather the diversity of ethnic groups, or rather cultures in Africa. Now, when we look at the reasons to do with the post-colonial origins, this simply had to do with the industrialization that now began. Because remember, there's mining activities that came, and you find that people began rushing to the industrial towns. I'll give an example of Zambia. I think some of the regions that you find in Zambia is that we have the copper belt. As the name itself states, it's a region that has a lot of copper. There's a lot of copper mining. So people from other regions like the northern part of Zambia, the Luapula part of Zambia and other regions had to migrate to the copper belt to find jobs there and better their living through having or obtaining a job in the mining sector. So now they left their own ethnic groups and they never returned back. So wherever they went, as Bembas or as whatever ethnic group you're coming from, they have formed their own sort of ethnic group. And as it goes on, you'll find that later on there's differences in the languages that is spoken between those who've migrated to the copper belt and the original people in the northern of the Luapula. The Bemba kind of, or the languages that they spoke before, is kind of different from what is being spoken now. Another example I can give also in Zambia is in the capital city, which is Lusaka. So you find that the people have migrated from across Zambia to Lusaka for businesses, for jobs and so on. So most people who've settled in Lusaka are now speaking one language, which is the Nyanja. So Nyanja is just simply not a language at all, but it's something that has been or is coming from the Chewa people of Eastern Province. But then you'll find that there is similarity in the Chewa language with the Nyanja, but it's diluted, so it's not as exact as the Chichewa that is spoken in the Eastern Province among the Chewa people. So as people continue to settle in Lusaka, they are now speaking the Nyanja language, the Bembas, the Tongas, the Chewa people themselves. So there's a different kinds of people that have settled in Lusaka, all now beginning to speak this so-called the Nyanja. So in the, let's talk of 50 years or 100 years to come, the Nyanja now will be recognized as the language of the Nyanja people in Lusaka. But meanwhile, it's just something that has been created as a result of these movements or migration of people from the rural centers to the industrial regions. So that has to do with the post-colonial origins, and this diversification will continue happening, I think, in Africa. But what is good is that we've got at least what has been formed as nations. We've got the nation of Zambia, the nation of Malawi, nations all across Africa. And if we are to break this diversification too much and ensure that there's growth in the country, I think we have to embrace the new nations that has been created, because I think we can't go back to those ethnic groups that we had in the past, because they've been diluted. Right now, I'm a Bemba Lamba person. My father is Bemba. So you find that even he himself, he's Bemba Lamba. Probably his father is also another Bemba something. So there's a lot of dilution in these ethnic groups, and what we can now just begin embracing is Zambia as a new ethnic group that we can have and see how we can forge forward in terms of economic growth, in terms of reducing political conflicts that rise whenever there's elections that are about to begin. Yeah, so I think the way forward is just embracing the nation Zambia, or the ethnic group called Zambia. I think that's why the late president, the co-founder of Zambia, I may say, our great KK emphasized on one Zambia, one nation, because I think he did foresee the many ethnic groups that existed in our country, and therefore one Zambia, one nation, though it's kind of working and here and there, but I think that could be the way forward, because I think diversification in terms of culture will continue happening, but if we embrace on the new culture, which is Zambia, that could help us in some way. Though even that one, because we've got now marriages taking place between Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, and so on. But yeah, I think that will never stop. So yeah,